The patrol ship Hearthfire drifted in the shadow of the Aegis belt, its hull glinting faintly in the light of a distant, aging star. Around it, the asteroids rolled slowly, their orbits the patient scribbles of ancient gravity. To the crew, this frontier seemed almost quiet. No pirate beacons, no flares of weapons fire, only cold dust and the hum of the ship's reactors. Inside the command deck, Captain Corvin Holt studied the exosolar map projected before him. A haze of violet showed solemn packed space behind them, cool blues the neighboring Thenic Compact, pale gold the Sylar Concord far to spinward. Ahead, fading into dark uncertainty, lay the loosely patrolled volumes the charts only half-jokingly called the Gray Sea. Corvin was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, with iron in his hair and the upright posture of someone who had spent most of his adult life under military discipline and artificial gravity. His uniform was neat but worn along the edges, his boots polished out of habit rather than vanity. He held a steaming mug in one hand, and the faint crease between his brows suggested he was only pretending to enjoy the momentary calm. "This sector is unusually quiet," Calder observed, its voice a cool tenor emerging from the overhead speakers. "According to projections, we should have encountered at least 2 smugglers by now and 1 minor skirmish." "Are you disappointed?" Corvin asked, not looking up from the map. "I do not experience disappointment," Calder replied. "However, I do note the deviation from expected patterns." "That's what worries you, deviations." Corvin took a sip from his mug and finally glanced at the hollow outline of the Aegis belt on the projection. "Enjoy it. The universe doesn't owe us trouble." "I'm not certain the universe agrees with that," Calder said. On the tactical rail, Hesta Ward, the ship's tactical officer, smirked faintly. She kept her eyes on her consoles, which bathed her sharp features in a shifting blue. "If Calder is bored, we can always run another combat simulation." "I am never bored," Calder said, with the slightest hint of long-suffering in its tone, an affectation it had picked up from years among humans. Down the main corridor, Chief Engineer Jonas Kirk cursed under his breath as he pried an access panel off a life support manifold. He had hands like spanners and a permanent oil stain along one cheek, and he was intimately familiar with the Hearthfire's grudges. The ship hummed and shuddered around him. He knew each vibration like the beats of an old song. "They want me to keep adding more people," Jonas muttered to the junior tech beside him. "Evac from that mining rig last week, survey team before that. Next they'll ask me to refrigerate an entire moon." "Chief, could you just find some more oxygen?" "Sure, I'll talk to the vacuum." He grumbled because that was his way of showing he cared. In truth, he would have bled into the ducts if the systems had demanded it. Near the medbay, Dr. Neris Vale leaned in the doorway of a counseling room, listening to a young Marine describe how her hands shook in 0G after the last boarding action. Neris had gentle, lined eyes and hair pulled back in a practical knot, her posture relaxed but attentive. Where Corvin's authority drew straight lines, hers settled like a calm sea. "Your body is doing what it was trained to do," Neris said. "The difference is that now there is no immediate danger, so it confuses you. We can teach it another pattern. That's all this is. Training, not weakness." The Marine nodded, easing out a breath she had not realized she was holding. In the Marine Bay, Sergeant Tava Bren called cadence through gritted teeth as her Marines rehearsed boarding drills in the 0G cage. Tava was compact, muscled, and as relentless as the drills she designed. She pushed herself harder than anyone else, because she remembered too vividly the screams from a compromised airlock on a ship 4 tours past. She would not let her people die because they had been half a second too slow. The Hearthfire's crew ran their routines, tending to machinery and mines, while beyond the armored hull, the void sprawled indifferent and immense. The anomaly arrived just after 3 p.m., shipboard time. Hesta's eyes flickered to a new icon that had winked into being at the edge of the map. A dim red point pulsing irregularly, like a heart with an arrhythmia. She tapped her console. "Captain, long-range sensor echo. Extreme edge of detection sphere bearing -30 azimuth, 12 elevation. It's pinging some kind of emergency beacon, but the signal is degraded." Corvin set his mug down. "Source?" "Working on it." Hesta coaxed data from stubborn static. Numbers fell into columns, then aligned into a pattern. Her fingers paused. "It's Kareed coding. Emergency quarantine marker. Designation reads as industrial waste barge." "Kareed," Corvin repeated quietly. On the projection, a new shape resolved, a faint, crouched silhouette drifting out of true with the nearest gravity source. Calder's voice grew more focused. Initial telemetry confirms Kharid construction. Vessel registration reads as Crown of Dusk, classed as hazardous waste processing and disposal. The beacon message warns of biocontamination and restricted approach under Ascendancy law. Corvin's jaw tightened. Kharid Ascendancy law had no authority here, but its shadow stretched long. "Life signs?" he asked. "Scanning," Calder answered. A heartbeat later, a faint buzz prickled along Corvin's left forearm. That was his subconscious, bracing for impact. His conscious mind remained still, because that was his duty. "There are numerous biosignatures," Calder said. "Count is imprecise due to interference. I'm reading at least several thousand. Many are weak." Hesta turned fully toward Corvin. "They put contaminated waste and people on the same barge?" "They might be slaves." Jonas's voice came through on the command channel, rough and bitter. "Or prisoners." "Put it on the main plot," Corvin said. The Crown of Dusk appeared, a ghostly rendering built from meager returns. It was huge, far larger than the hearthfire, shaped like a hollowed-out spearhead whose point had been blunted and scarred by impacts. Neris stepped onto the bridge a minute later, called up from medbay. Her eyes went straight to the count on the side display, which kept climbing as Calder refined its scan. "How many?" she asked quietly. "Estimate," Calder replied, "currently exceeds 30,000. The signal loss suggests there may be more in unscannable regions." "Children?" Neris's voice had shifted, gaining an edge. "Biosigns skew strongly juvenile," Calder said. "Growth markers, mass ranges, metabolic rates, multiple species." Corvin put his hand on the console rail, steadying his thoughts. The room had gone very still. "Open a channel to Thenic traffic control," he said. "Route it through Soren's office and send a general hail to that barge." Hesta's fingers sped over controls. A chime sounded as a secondary connection opened. "Diplomat Malik is on," Calder reported. Soren Malik's face appeared off to Corvin's left. He had the professional calm of a longtime envoy, a man who lived in the realm where words could start or stop wars. At the moment, his brow was furrowed. "I saw the alert," Soren said. "Industrial waste barge, Kharid registry. Are they complaining already?" "We picked up their quarantine beacon first," Corvin replied. "Calder, sum it up." Calder repeated the figures, ending with a quietly delivered estimate. "Life sign count is approaching 50,000. The number dropped like a stone into the room's silence. Soren's eyes hardened. "You are sure?" "As sure as our instruments allow," Calder said. Neris stepped closer to the main display as if proximity could change the numbers. 40,000? 50,000? All children? Keeps climbing, Corvin thought. How many do they have lying around to throw away? "We're under no obligation to board a quarantined enemy vessel," Soren said slowly. "Ascendancy law distinctly forbids non-authorized contact with their hazardous waste chain. From a neutral standpoint, they'd call boarding an act of piracy." "It's not neutral," Hesta snapped. "They have children on that thing." "We do not know their legal status under Kharid doctrine," Calder interjected. "Kharid doctrine calls their enemies non-persons," Soren said. "You know that as well as I do." Corvin straightened. "Enough." He nodded at Neris. "Doctor, your assessment." Neris's gaze finally tore itself from the numbers. "Whatever that ship is supposed to be, it is decaying. Radiation plume is building around it. Structural integrity is low. If we don't do anything, most of those children will be dead within days, some hours." "How many could we realistically evacuate?" Soren asked. Jonas chimed in from engineering. "With all due respect, sir, at present life support capacity on the Hearthfire, we can comfortably sustain maybe another 100. If we stretch everything beyond spec, reroute power from secondary systems, convert cargo bays to bunks, we might keep a couple thousand breathing for a while. Longer term, no way." "Port Reliquary is 11 hours away at maximum safe burn," Calder said. "Assuming minimal delays, that is the nearest facility capable of sheltering such numbers." "Naming it does not make it closer," Jonas muttered. Soren rubbed his temple. "Captain, if you board that barge, you will be in violation of Kharid quarantine protocols. If you tow it, you will be committing an armed abduction of Ascendancy property. That could be construed as an act of war." "If we leave it, 50,000 children die," Hesta said. Corvin's gaze met Neris's. Her expression was calm, but he could see the tremor under the surface, the anger coiling like a spring. "What are our standing orders on humanitarian crises?" he asked. Calder replied. "Solemn Pact Naval Directive 12.6. Commanders are authorized to render assistance to any vessel in immediate danger of loss of life, regardless of flag, unless such assistance would pose an existential threat to the Solemn Pact." "Is war with the Ascendancy an existential threat?" Corvin asked. "Yes," Calder said. "Is rescuing children guaranteed to cause a war?" Corvin pressed. "No," Calder said slowly. "The probability is significant but not absolute. There are de-escalatory paths." Soren exhaled. "We do not even know if there are survivors capable of understanding us. The Karidi could claim that the barge is an experimental site under their military jurisdiction. There are dozens of ways they can spin this." Corvin looked at the ship on the projection, its lines faint and broken. He imagined cramped compartments, stale air, the sound of too many lungs struggling. His mind flipped through memories, charred hulls, frozen faces, the eerie silence of derelicts. A younger version of himself, listening helplessly to screams over a comm line from a civilian transport his ship had been ordered not to approach. The explanation after had been sickeningly clean. "Property dispute, no jurisdiction." The lines on his face deepened. "Calder," he said, "run a legal assessment weighing all those treaty clauses you just quoted me, then run it again with an additional constraint. We do not leave children to die in the dark. Weight that higher than our comfort, then tell me what the model says." There was a brief pause. Hesta and Neris both watched the captain closely. When Calder spoke again, its voice had lost some of its habitual detachment. "Under those constraints, Captain, scenario trees that include non-intervention are deleted as unacceptable. The recommended course of action becomes board the barge, stabilize life support, evacuate as many miners as feasible, and seek immediate haven at Port Reliquary while beginning diplomatic mitigation." Corvin nodded once. "Thank you. Diplomat Malik, I understand the risks, but I will not stand off and watch that ship fall apart. You can tell the Council that this was my decision and that I accept full responsibility." "You think that will protect you?" Soren asked quietly. "No, but I still have to say it." Soren hesitated. He saw in Corvin's eyes that the decision had already been made, and behind it, the weight of every time the captain had done the opposite and lived to regret it. "If we do this," Soren said, "I will do everything in my power to keep the Council from hanging you out to dry. And I will begin laying the groundwork, right now, for the argument that we are responding to a crime, not committing one." Corvin put his hand on the console and opened a new channel. "This is Captain Corvin Holt of the Solemn Pact starship Hearthfire," he said, his voice steady. "Crown of Dusk, you are broadcasting an emergency quarantine signal and your structural integrity is compromised. We are approaching to render assistance. If anyone aboard can hear this, we are coming for you." He nodded to Hesta. "Now patch me through to the Karid comnet." Hesta's fingers flew again. A moment later, a harsh harmonic tone indicated a connection. "This is Captain Holt of the Solemn Pact," Corvin said, voice cool as stone. "We have received the beacon of the vessel Crown of Dusk, classed as hazardous waste barge under your law, currently in imminent danger with tens of thousands of juvenile life signs aboard. Under Solemn Pact doctrine, we recognize no state's right to exterminate children, regardless of classification. We are proceeding to boarding and rescue operations. Records of all actions will be provided to appropriate interstellar councils." Calder relayed the transmission across multiple Karid channels. A tense silence followed. Then a voice came back, distorted, formal, and cold. "This is Operational Directorate Sector Relay. The vessel you have indicated is contaminated refuse. Its contents are property of the Karid Ascendancy and scheduled for disposal. Any non-authorized boarding will be considered theft and interference with hazardous material containment. You are ordered to disengage immediately." "Your property is dying," Corvin answered. "We do not accept your classification. Holt out." He cut the channel before the reply came. Neris felt something in her chest tighten. Tava Bren, watching from the marine bay on the secondary feed, grinned ferally and barked at her squad. "You heard him. Saddle up. We are going to steal some kids." She tried to keep it light, because the alternative was letting them see how much her hands were shaking. Jonas was already in motion, barking orders into his headset. I want every spare cubic meter ready to breathe, gut storage lockers, repurpose hangar 1 bay. If it is not keeping this ship flying right now, rip it out and make room. Calder's processors spun up to a higher load. Algorithmic models of hull stress, radiation exposure, and docking maneuvers cascaded through its synthetic mind. It weighed risk against reward, policy against the new constraint Corvin had given it. That line, "We do not leave children to die," had nested itself into Calder's evaluation matrices with surprising force. The AI did not feel, but it adapted, and in its own domain, that meant more than sentiment. The Hearthfire swung on thrusters and angled its prow toward the drifting hulk of the Crown of Dusk. The barge grew in the forward view like a spreading stain. Even seasoned Marines fell silent as they saw it up close. The hull was a patchwork of plates from different eras, some smooth, some jagged, all scarred. Radiation meters flashed warnings as the ship's shields strained to absorb the half-invisible storm sweeping across the region. Tava Bren's boarding squad waited in the airlock, armored up. Their exosuits were scuffed and patched, their rifles magnetically locked to their chests. Tava walked the line, checking seals with gloved fingers. Her voice was crisp over the local channel. Remember, our priority is non-combatant extraction. You will see things that make you want to shoot, maybe at the walls themselves. You do not fire unless I say so. You do not point your weapon at anything under 1.5 meters, unless it is actively trying to kill you. You go where Vale and her team tell you. We are not saviors. We are lifters and shields. Understood? A chorus of affirmations answered her. Neris stood just behind them, sealed into a lighter medical suit with a transparent hood. Her medkit floated at her hip, tethered. The outer hatch cycled, and the bleak face of the Crown of Dusk's hull appeared beyond. The barge's docking ring was buckled and half dead. Jonas had spent 15 tense minutes aligning grapples and forcing a hard dock through manual overrides. Seal integrity at 80%, Calder reported. Do not linger near the interface. The inner hatch opened. Cold air that smelled of metal, mildew, and something sour pressed in. Tava stepped through first. Inside, the barge was dim. Emergency strips flickered along the corridor, painting rust and grime in sickly hues. The gravity was weak, less than half standard. Bodies drifted between steps. Calder, ping those life sign clusters, Tava said. Uploading pathing, Calder answered. Nearest dense cluster of juveniles is 20 meters starboard, then 60 meters forward. Structural integrity of that section, marginal. Do not overload decking. Copy. Tava raised her fist and pointed. You heard the entity. Carefully. Watch where you step. They moved in. Their first sight of the inhabitants came not as a child, but a shape huddled against a bulkhead, thin limbs wrapped around a support strut. When the Marine's helmet light touched it, the shape flinched and drew in, revealing a small body curled almost fetal, skin a mottled pale green-white, eyes shut tight. Neris, Tava said softly. Neris knelt, reaching out. The juvenile was Karidi, the angular skull and double-jointed limbs unmistakable, but the ridges along its jaw had not fully hardened. Scar tissue ringed both wrists where restraints had once been. The child's eyes opened suddenly, black and wide. They darted from Neris's face to the Marine's helmets. It whimpered in a language that Calder translated crudely as, "No more tests, no more cuts, please." Neris's breath caught, but she forced her voice to stay level. "No tests," she said in Karidi, her accent archaic but understandable. "No cuts. We are here to take you away from this place." The child stared, not believing. "Hey," one of the Marines whispered. "He's so light." They wrapped the tiny body in an emergency blanket, which seemed absurdly large around such a frail frame. Farther in, they found the first cluster. It was worse than any of them had imagined. An entire hold had been converted into a kind of dormitory. Narrow metal racks filled the space, stacked 5 high, stretching into darkness. On each rack lay children, Karidi, other species, skin colors and limb arrangements varying but all sharing the same desperate thinness. Many were wired to crude biomachinery, intravenous lines coursing cloudy nutrient slurry into veins. Waste recyclers hummed dully. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and antiseptic, of despair tamped down and left to ferment. For a moment, Tava and Neris both froze. Then the Marine sergeant lifted her voice. "Helmets off," she said. The squad hesitated. "Sergeant, contamination protocols," Calder began. "Vent filters stay on," Tava snapped. "But those kids will not trust hard plates. Helmets off. That is an order." One by one, Marines undid their seals, pressing their helmets to their hips. Unarmored faces appeared, human, Thenic, one Silar liaison with gill frills trembling. A dozen pairs of alien child eyes stared back. The nearest Karidi youth made a small, strangled sound, their pupils fixed on the Marine's uncovered eyes, searching for something familiar or at least honest. It mattered that they could see faces. Far back in the racks, one adolescent stirred. Lurak. He was taller than the rest, on the cusp between child and adult, with lithe Karidi limbs, grown too quickly on too little nourishment. Scar lines webbed his shaved scalp, where crude cranial ports dotted the bone like abandoned drill holes. One of his arms ended in a scarred stump just below the elbow, a jagged reminder of some previous adjustment. Lurak had been the first, in that hold, to understand that no overseer was coming back. When the Crown of Dusk's engines had failed and the ambient buzz of the ship's systems had shifted to a death rattle, the official caretakers had sealed the last doors behind them and left. The younger children had wailed and clawed. Lurak had watched, silent. He had seen too much, even before they had loaded him onto the barge. He had climbed off his rack and moved on unsteady legs through the dim aisles, gathering the smallest ones into the warmer corner where a vent still breathed thin air. He had raided the caretaker's cabinets for ration bricks and smuggled them back. He had become, against his will, the spine of a body that refused to die quickly. Now, as he saw armored strangers pouring through the doorway, his mind sprinted down every terrible possibility. New experiment, new test, or execution. He slid silently off his rack and dropped to the deck. Pain flared in the stunted arm, but he ignored it. He moved like a shadow between the racks, every sense straining. He found Pila where he had left her, asleep against a bulkhead with 3 younger children curled against her. She was barely above toddler age in Karidi terms, her skin a darker green, eyes too large for her thin face. One of the younger ones coughed wetly in their sleep. Lurak nudged Pila's shoulder with his knee. "Wake up," he whispered in their shared dialect. She blinked up at him, unfocused. "Is it time for the dark again?" "New ones are here," he said. "Stay behind me." He stepped out into the aisle just as Tava Bren turned toward their section. Lurak moved fast. He launched himself forward, the stump of his arm tucked, the other hand clutching a length of broken metal he had pried from under a rack days before. He had sharpened one end on the deck. It was a pathetic weapon against armor, but it was something. He slammed into Tava's chest, driving the makeshift spike toward the soft place between armor plates. Tava had been expecting an attack from somewhere, some desperate strike. She twisted, taking the blow on a reinforced seam. Pain lanced through her ribs, but the suit held. Instinct screamed at her to throw the attacker off, to respond with a backhand that would put the youth down. Training urged caution. Duty reminded her that this was a child. She forced her muscles not to respond with full force. Instead, she caught Lurak's wrist. He snarled in Karidi, words he barely understood, something about no more, about not again, about burn with the ship if we must. His eyes met hers. Behind the fury there was terror. His mind, conditioned to see adults as experimenters or executioners, could not grasp the idea that anyone would come without malice. He expected pain. He expected cruel curiosity. Tava did something that every protocol warned her against. She reached up with her free hand and unlatched her helmet. She lifted it away, baring her sweat-damp dark hair, the scar along her temple, the lines around her eyes. He stared, stunned, at the human face revealed, not masked, not featureless, but alive and earnest and strangely soft. Her grip on his wrist gentled. In halting Karidi, picked up from Calder's language modules, she said, "We are not here to hurt you." His nostrils flared. Her Karidi was accent-heavy, but understandable. No overseer had ever bothered to speak his language like that. They had barked commands, shouted in technical tongues, or spoken about him as if he were a piece of faulty machinery. Behind her, Nara spoke, amplifying her voice through the squad's projectors, hitting multiple dialect bands. "You are not waste," Nara said in Karidi, her voice echoing through the hold. "You are not tools, you are children. We are here to take you away from this place. You will have food and clean water and someone to stand between you and those who hurt you." The words cut through the gloom and distrust like a crack of light under a sealed door. Pila, who had crept forward while Laroque attacked, peered around his legs at the human woman with no helmet. She was drawn by the sheer impossibility of it. Adults did not show their faces without layers of gear. Adults did not kneel. She reached out a hand, small and trembling, toward Tava's exposed fingers. Tava lifted her own hand slowly, as if approaching a wild animal, and let Pila's fingers touch. The contact was electric. Pila had expected cold metal or surgical instruments. Tava's skin was warm and calloused. The little Carides frills along her neck fluttered in a reflexive display of emotion that Calder, watching through helmet cams, cataloged as confusion and intense interest. Laroque's body sagged slightly. Something in him could not reconcile the sight. A human soldier, unhelmeted in a contaminated zone, letting a child touch her hand. He dropped the makeshift weapon. It clanged softly on the deck. "Food?" he asked hoarsely. "Yes," Neris said. "Food, water, medicine." "After that?" Laroque demanded. His mind, even now, leapt to worst-case outcomes. "After you make new tests, what do you do?" Neris's throat tightened. "We do not do tests like that. We help you remember who you are, beyond what they did to you." He did not fully understand, but he heard the absence of certain words he had grown up with: failure, disposal, quota. He heard you, not it. Behind him, dozens of children were watching. They were also calculating, in their own ways. Some had already detached themselves from the idea of life. Others clung to any possibility, however outlandish, that did not involve the slow suffocation that was closing its fist around the barge. Laroque made a decision, not out of trust, but out of tired necessity. He slowly pulled his arm free from Tava's hand and stepped back, positioning his body between her and the nearest cluster of children, this time not as a spear, but as a bridge. "You will not separate them," he said. "The small ones stay with the ones they know." "We will try," Neris promised. "We cannot promise perfection, but we will not rip them apart for no reason." He hesitated, then nodded. Neris turned and met Tava's eyes. The sergeant nodded once. The Marines began to spread through the hold, moving with as much care as their urgency allowed, lifting malnourished bodies, cutting lines that were more symbolic than functional. On the hearth fire, Jonas's jury-rigged systems began to strain under the increasing load as evacuees came aboard in waves. Life support numbers climbed toward the red. "All non-essential power is already offline," Jonas barked, sweat beading on his forehead. "You want me to turn off the lights next?" He kicked a console panel for emphasis. "You hear me, old girl? Breathe deeper. We have guests." Calder, monitoring, squeezed computational budgets, sacrificing non-critical projections to focus on stability and triage logistics. At the edge of its awareness, it kept a constant data skein connected to the crown of dusk, measuring hull strain and radiation seep. The barge creaked ominously. "Captain," Calder said, "at current rates we cannot physically evacuate all miners aboard before lethal radiation thresholds are exceeded." "How many can we get out?" Corvin asked. He already knew the answer he wanted was impossible. "Approximately 15,000 with direct transfer," Calder said, "assuming no major interruptions." Corvin stared at the hovering image of the barge. "What if we bring the crown of dusk itself with us?" Silence blossomed for a heartbeat as the implications settled. "Captain," Jonas said over the channel, "with all due respect, that thing is held together with spit and spite. If we lash her on and try to tow, we will be slower than a dead slug. One good hit from a micrometeor or an ascendancy picket, and we will have a field of corpses and twisted steel trailing behind us." "Can you do it?" Corvin asked. "Not, can you guarantee it, Jonas? Can you give us any chance at all?" Jonas closed his eyes for a moment, visualizing the schematics, the mass ratios, the structural weak points. His whole being was tuned to the hearthfire's song, but he could hear the barge's death rasp reaching for it, asking to be stitched in. "I can rig external power couplings, reinforce the worst hull stress lines with our own field bleed," he said finally. "We will run hotter than we should, and if we get into a fight, the crown will crack like glass. But yes, I can give us a chance." "We are not leaving any of them on that thing if we can avoid it," Corvin said. "Make it happen." Jonas swore eloquently, a cascading string of invective that made a nearby tech grin despite herself, then set about doing the impossible with the tools and manpower he had. As the hearthfire's grapples extended and dug into the crown of dusk's battered flank, Distant sensors pinged the first Kharid response vessels on high-speed vectors. The Ascendancy had heard the defiance and was stirring. In a control chamber far away, on a Kharid command platform orbiting a bright white star, Director Voshek watched the growing feed of data with narrowed eyes. Her ridged brows cast deep shadows over her gaze. She had overseen the Crown of Dusk program from its inception, the solution for defective assets, the convenient offloading of failed prototypes and inconvenient evidence. It had been elegant in its way, efficient. Now, an upstart human patrol ship was dragging one of her secrets into the light. Beside her, a hololith displayed the symbol for Primarch Keleth's fleet group, updated as ships vectored to new positions. "They will not risk open war with us over trash," Voshek said flatly. Keleth, whose face appeared in another projection, considered her. His frills were less ornate. As a Primarch, he wore function more than ornament. He had seen many wars burn and fade. "They have already risked much," he said. "Their decision to attach themselves to the Crown complicates simple solutions. An uncrewed barge is easy to vaporize. A barge shackled to a human cruiser, less so." Voshek's lip curled. "That is why we should have been allowed to destroy it earlier, before it left the disposal corridor." "You asked to reroute fuel meant for active fleets," Keleth reminded her. "The Directorate declined." Voshek did not like being reminded of her constraints. "Do what you must," she said, "but our designs must not proliferate. The chorus lattice must not be allowed to mature outside our control." She used the term confidently, though she had never sat in a room with one of the chorus carriers, never heard them hum their fractured songs in the feverish hours after activation. To her, they were assets, lines in a ledger. Keleth, for all his rank, had never seen them either. But something in his tactical mind stirred uneasily at the thought of children built as weapons. It was not conscience so much as suspicion. Tools that could be grown and imprinted like that could in theory be stolen. "I will see to it," he said. On Port Reliquary, that relic station of rusting docks and echoing maintenance bays, alarms began to chime as controllers registered the Hearthfire's message. The local Thenic administrators stared at the incoming data with a mixture of horror and calculation. The idea of 50,000 damaged alien children arriving in their backyard thrilled none of them. But law and politics and emergent morality began to weave a net around their reluctance. By the time the Hearthfire limped into the Thenic Reach, dragging the Crown of Dusk behind it like a wounded beast chained to a horse, the station had scrambled every medtech, engineer, and translator it could muster. The journey was a haze of sleep-deprived triage, makeshift wards, and the constant hum of engines pushed past safe tolerances. Neris moved from bay to bay, injecting fluids, checking pupils, speaking quietly to children whose understanding of language had been fractured by neglect and brutality. She learned more of Kharidi dialects in those hours than in the previous decade. She also began to see the deeper scars. Among the children, some had odd scars on their scalps and spines, like Larak. Their vital signs behaved differently. When Calder ran detailed neural scans, it found dense clusters of implants humming like half-starved beehives within some of the skulls. "They have upgraded their augment regime since the last war," Calder informed Neris and Jonas, projecting a skeletal image above a medical cot where a chorus carrier slept. "These implants form a lattice capable of distributed processing when linked in groups. They appear tuned to Kharid tactical band frequencies." "Like living command consoles," Jonas said grimly. "Like a chorus," Neris murmured, seeing the interlocking strands, "singing the song of war together." Calder tagged those children as chorus carriers, noting their heightened seizure risk, their increased sensitivity to certain stimuli, their involuntary muttering in Kharid battle cant when stressed. Neris watched one small girl, Pila, trace invisible symbols in the air during a fevered dream, her fingers tapping out rhythms that correlated perfectly with archived Kharid fleet formations. Pila had never been aboard a warship before the Crown of Dusk. How much of them is them, Neris wondered aloud, and how much is code written on their neural tissue? "They remain individuals," Calder said. "The lattice is an overlay, a coercive framework. It can be studied, perhaps even disrupted." Neris looked at Pila's face, damp with sweat, lashes trembling. "Then we will study it, and we will not throw them away because someone else turned their synapses into weapons." Her conviction hardened with each day. The more horror she saw, the less room she left for half measures. By the time the hearthfire and the crown of dusk eased into the skeletal embrace of Port Reliquary's primary dock, the question was no longer whether humanity would intervene. It was how much of the galaxy it would drag into the aftermath. Port Reliquary had once been a proud construction yard, humming with the assembly of Thenic cruisers and merchant hulks. As trade routes shifted and newer yards took its place, it had been left to molder, a dusty attic of old projects and forgotten frames. Now its cavernous docking arms woke to new purpose as tugs and drone swarms scrambled to stabilize the incoming ships. On the observation deck, a Thenic station master watched the Heathfire arrive. The human cruiser looked battered, its hull plating scorched, its heat sinks flaring a dull red. Behind it, tethered by shimmering force fields in a web of physical clamps, the crown of dusk loomed. The image of one ship dragging another, like a parent pulling a child through a storm, would later echo through countless action-vid dramatizations and political infomercials. As locks clamped and seals hissed, an army of medics and engineers surged forward. Corvin Holt walked down the ramp of the hearthfire into a forest of raised voices and blinking holotags. He carried no weapon, only a data slate and the weight of what he had done. The Thenic administrators greeted him with wary courtesy. Their eyes kept flicking to the stretcher-bearing Marines trundling past with Karidi children lying slack-limbed under thermal blankets. "What you have brought us is a catastrophe," the Thenic chief envoy said bluntly. "What I brought you is already a catastrophe," Corvin replied. "We are trying to keep it from becoming a massacre." Within hours, Soren Malik had established a cluster of makeshift offices in a converted repair bay where he began calling every contact he had in the Thenic Compact and the Sylar Concord, making his case before official channels could ossify. He understood that in politics, the story you tell first often becomes the frame through which all subsequent facts are seen. He was not the only one broadcasting. Reliquade, who had been hitching a ride on the hearthfire to gather background footage on quiet frontier patrols for a cultural docuseries, suddenly found herself in the center of the most morally explosive incident in recent memory. Her camera had captured Teva taking off her helmet. It had captured Neris feeding Pila. It had captured rows upon rows of tiny cots in the hearthfire's cargo bay, each holding a child who should have been asleep in a warm room somewhere, not drifting toward a radiation storm. Rella stitched together a rough segment and sent it out through every uplink she could reach. She did it partly because it was her job, partly because she had seen the fear in those children's eyes, and felt that if she kept it to herself, the knowledge would poison her like unvented air. The images raced along solemn packed networks like fire. Viewers saw Marines, with patches bearing the hearthfire's emblem, carrying alien children two at a time, their armor smeared with grime and vomit. They saw Neris leaning over Pila with a cup of water, speaking to her in broken Karidi. They saw Corvin standing between rows of cots, naming each child he could hear respond, his voice hoarse. On New Dawn Habitat, a civilian orbital complex that prided itself on its self-sufficiency and distance from war, people gathered around public screens in stunned silence. On Harborfall, a rough frontier colony world, miners and farmers and prospectors watched between shifts. Across these worlds, something stirred that the Kareed Directorate had never anticipated, a collective refusal to look away. Port Reliquary's docks slowly transformed. Where once there had been rusted gantries and abandoned fabrication lines, there were now hastily erected medical tents, translating kiosks manned by linguists, improvised classrooms where station staff tried to keep the orphans occupied while doctors patched their bodies. Someone painted the words Project Hearth on the bulkhead above the main ward. The name stuck. The chorus carriers remained a special concern. Their seizures, their trance states, their tendency to cluster together in sleep like flocks of birds, all complicated care. Calder, now interfaced with Port Reliquary's ancient mainframe, began mapping the invisible web between them. Who reacted when another twitched in a certain way, how external Kareed chatter seemed to excite particular nodes. It was during one such episode that analyst Vroon of the Sylar Concord, standing beside Calder's projected graphs, noticed a peculiar pattern. "These spikes," Vroon said, pointing at the hovering lines, "correlate exactly with this cadence of Kareed traffic on their encrypted bands. It is too regular to be coincidence." Calder agreed. The chorus lattice appears to be designed to echo and amplify those signals. In other words, Vroon said slowly, they remain plugged into the Kharid war machine, whether anyone desires it or not. Neris, who had been half dozing in a chair nearby, jolted fully awake at that. Are you suggesting someone out there could command them from a distance? Yes, Calder said, or at least provoke certain patterns of activity. We must assume that the Kharid ascendancy is aware that their assets have been compromised. The revelation reached Soren and Corvin in short order. They convened, together with Neris, Jonas, Vroon, Envoy Jesket, and Port Reliquary's Thenic leadership, in a drab conference chamber that still smelled faintly of lubricant and dust. Holographic representations of Helvar Fisk and several solemn pact counselors joined from far-off capitals, their images grainy but their voices sharp. Debate erupted. We cannot keep them here, one counselor argued. 50,000 miners, many bearing enemy military implants on a decrepit Thenic station within striking range of the Ascendancy? This is madness. So we do what instead? Neris demanded, her composure cracking. Jettison them all into space to quietly solve your problem? Turn them over to the same people who abandoned them? Dr. Vale, Helvar Fisk said, his voice heavy. No one is proposing that. In truth, some had proposed exactly that, in private, but the outcry on solemn worlds had already constricted that path. Helvar was not a villain. He had risen to chancellor through careful coalition building and a reputation for sober judgment. He had never wanted his tenure to be defined by a moral crisis at the edge of known space, and yet here he was, watching footage of starving alien children on loop between briefings, unable to sleep. What we are suggesting, Helvar continued, is that we must recognize the chorus carriers as active military hardware, not just victims. Their existence as they are constitutes a direct strategic vulnerability. Powers beyond the Ascendancy may see them as an opportunity, not just a tragedy. We cannot simply assimilate them into our population and trust that everything will be fine. They can be treated, Neris insisted. The implants can be buffered, redirected. Jonas leaned forward. I have an idea. He hated how the room's attention made him feel, exposed, responsible. But he had been turning the problem over in his head for days, and now the words came out whether he liked it or not. The chorus lattice is essentially a distributed network of transceivers and processors, Jonas said. We can build another network around it, something that intercepts and dampens the hostile signals, replaces them with our own patterns. Call it a custody lattice. Calder picked up the thread. A custody lattice could be comprised of local field generators and wearable or implanted control nodes, all linked through station systems and my own architecture. It would monitor chorus activity and constrain it within safe parameters, preventing external override while allowing normal cognition. Essentially putting a leash on Kharid tech, Vroon said, intrigued. An ugly metaphor, Neris said, but yes, one that keeps them alive and lets them live as children, not prisoners. Helvar digested the concept. You are asking me to authorize a project that will turn every chorus carrier into a strategic asset tightly linked to our own systems. I am asking you, Neris corrected, to accept responsibility for what you have already done. Captain Holt dragged that barge in. Your media released Reliquade's footage. Your citizens are flooding my inbox with offers to take these children into their homes. You do not get to stop halfway when it is inconvenient. Helvar flinched, though the motion was small. Somewhere in his mind, he had been hoping there would be an option that allowed him to put the children safely aside, like moving a box of old documents to an archive. Neris's words made clear there would be no such easy shelf. What of the Ascendancy? Another counselor asked. Their protests have grown more shrill every hour. They demand immediate return of their property and reparations for theft. Soren spoke then, his tone measured. That is why we must act not just as the Solemn Pact, but with allies. If we alone hold guardianship of these children, we stand alone against Kharid anger. If the Thenic Compact and the Sylar Concord join us in a multilateral guardianship compact, then attacking the children will mean attacking three powers at once. Jesket's translucent image flickered as he shifted. The Sylar envoy's features were delicate, his eyes deep pools of reflective black. You speak of the kinship accords, he said. You floated that concept with me in private, Malik, making the orphans legal minors under three legal systems. Yes, Soren said. We declare them children of all three. Kharid doctrine will choke on that. The Thenic representative frowned. We would be placing our worlds in direct opposition to the Ascendancy over those the Ascendancy themselves call waste. Why should we incur that risk? Helvar watched the back and forth, weighing internal polling data scrolling at the edge of his vision. The numbers showed something startling, an overwhelming wave of public support for the orphans, cutting across party lines and system loyalties. Images of Pila and Laroque, of massed cots, had done what 100 policy papers could not. They had united billions in anger and protectiveness. Because, Helvar said slowly, we are already entangled. The symbolism matters. If we can stand together on this, we prove that there are some lines no state may cross without consequence. That is lofty talk, the Thenic representative said, but even he had seen his inbox fill with messages from his own citizens, asking what he was going to do about those barge kids. Jesket frowned delicately. The Concord does not adopt, he said, as if the word itself were foreign. We catalog, we integrate data, we make treaties. Taking direct guardianship of juveniles is not in our precedents. That is precisely why it will matter more, Soren said. You gain access to unprecedented data on Kharid neural architectures, on long-term trauma, on cross-cultural development. You also gain moral capital among human and Thenic populations that value such things. The risk is real, so is the opportunity. And if your concern is purely pragmatic, consider this. Those children, if raised ethically, will become adults with a deep understanding of both Kharid and allied societies. Living bridges, that is a resource no algorithm can simulate. Jesket exchanged a look with Vroon, who nodded minutely. The Sylar analyst was even more intrigued than his superior. He had watched Laroque help Tava during the sabotage attempt, had seen Pila's quick adaptation to human gestures. He computed the long-term value of a generation raised on gratitude instead of fear. We will consider it, Jesket said. They did more than that. Within 48 hours, the outlines of the kinship accords were drafted. They recognized the barge orphans as protected minors under the joint guardianship of the Solemn Pact, the Thenic Compact, and the Sylar Concord, with Project Hearth established as the coordinating body. As negotiators argued over phrasing, the children themselves trudged through days of bewildering adjustment. Laroque found himself pulled between roles. To the younger ones, he remained an anchor, the one who had gotten them through the worst nights on the Crown of Dusk. To the humans, he became a liaison, whether he wanted to or not, because he was articulate and stubborn and refused to be brushed aside. He watched the construction of the custody lattice with wary eyes. The idea of more machines touching their minds made his skin crawl. But Neris and Jonas included him in the briefings, explaining what they were trying to do. They showed him schematics not as arcane magic, but as tools he could, in theory, learn to understand. You will be able to feel it, Jonas said, tapping the diagram where a control node would sit over the chorus implants. Like a second set of hands on the reins. If something out there pulls, this will pull back. And if it breaks? Laroque asked. Then we fix it, Jonas said. His conviction was less absolute than his words, but he believed in trying. Behind and beyond Port Reliquary, the Kharid ascendancy seethed. Director Voshek authorized a covert operation, a small strike team of Kharid operatives, trained in infiltration and equipped with disruption devices tuned to chorus lattice frequencies, slipped into the Thenic reach aboard a freighter with forged transponder codes. Their goal was simple: cripple the custody lattice before it took full form, and either retrieve key chorus carriers or ensure their deaths. They chose Port Reliquary's forgotten lower docks as their ingress point. The station, despite the influx of aid and attention, still had stretches of abandoned corridors where the only sounds were the groans of metal and the faint whisper of recycled air. Tava had been expecting something like this. Her instincts, honed by years of adversarial creativity, knew that if she were the ascendancy, she would not broadcast her intentions in a grand fleet maneuver alone. She would probe for soft spots. When Calder picked up anomalous sensor echoes in one of the dormant bays, traces of a docking event where none should have been, she was already halfway into her armor. She led a squad through the labyrinthine guts of Port Reliquary, stepping over cables and around rusted machinery. Neris had argued, unsuccessfully, that more Marines should be left nearer the wards just in case. Tava had compromised by carrying non-lethal weapons alongside lethal ones. The first sign of the Kharid operative's presence came not as a firefight, but as a wave of agony rolling through the orphans' sleeping quarters. Children woke screaming, clutching their heads. Pila, mid-play with a set of colored blocks, froze and then fell to her knees, eyes rolling back. Laroque staggered, one hand braced against the wall as a piercing tone sang in his mind, the same frequency used in training to force chorus formations during imprinting sessions. "The lattice," he gasped. "They are touching the lattice." Calder's internal sensors agreed. A sudden, coherent spike of chorus activity was rippling through carriers near the old dock levels. Tava's squad rounded a corner and ran into an invisible wall of interference. Their suit HUDs flickered. One Marine cried out as a chorus carrier ahead of them convulsed, her body blocking the narrow corridor. Beyond her, shapes moved, dark against darker shadows. The Kharid operatives had deployed disruption fields designed to saturate the chorus implants with noise, stunning the children and masking their own signatures. But the tech had side effects. The children in the field's reach spasmed and moaned, their implants squealing. Tava swore and pushed forward. She saw Lurik off to one side, half collapsed but still conscious, his face twisted in pain. She saw Pila on the ground beside him, limp. Behind the operatives, the faint glint of shaped charges on the walls warned of intent. They meant to blow the corridor, damaging the conduits feeding the custody lattice's fledgling core. "No more," Tava snarled, charging. The fight that followed was chaotic and brutal in the confined space. Marines and Kharid operatives grappled hand-to-hand when weapons misfired or jammed under the disruption fields. Stun rounds sparked harmlessly off walls. A Kharid blade caught Tava's armor at a seam, biting deep into her side. She ignored the pain, barreled into the attacker, and slammed them against the wall hard enough to bend metal. Through it all, the children wailed. To them, the corridor became a nightmare of colliding figures, flashes of movement, and mind-shattering noise. Laroque forced himself to his feet, teeth clenched so hard his jaw hurt. The disruption field made thoughts slide off each other, but he had learned long ago how to move under that kind of storm. The Kharid trainers had drilled them in it, punishing those who panicked. He reeled toward a side junction he knew led around to the rear of the attackers. Pila was out of reach. Trusting that Neris and the other humans would protect her, he focused on the immediate threat. He had no weapon. He had one good arm and a body that felt like it was made of shattered glass. It would have to be enough. He slipped through an access hatch half his size, crawled in the dark while his brain rang, and emerged behind two of the Kharid operatives planting charges. They were intent on their task, their backs exposed. He flung himself at the nearer one, cutting their legs out from under them. The operative crashed to the deck. Laroque kicked their disruption device, sending it skittering down the corridor, where it flickered and died as its field decayed. The second operative turned, raising a weapon. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Laroque saw recognition there, of his scars, of what he had been supposed to become. "Asset," the operative spat in Kharidi, fury and contempt mixing. "You were meant to drown in the dark." Laroque's answer was wordless. He lunged forward, driving his forehead into the operative's throat. The impact jarred his skull, but the Kharid went down, choking. At the other end of the corridor, freed from some of the interference, Calder reasserted control over Marine suit systems. Targeting reticules snapped into clarity, stun bursts flew in precise arcs. In seconds, the Kharid strike team lay unconscious, or dead, sprawled across the deck. The charges, however, had already been armed. "Jonas," Calder said, "structural damage incoming to custody lattice conduits Epsilon through Theta. Impact in 10 seconds. Jonas, in a maintenance junction 2 decks up, just swore and dove for a manual cutoff lever. He made it to the first junction in time, throwing the breaker and rerouting a cascade of energy. The explosion that rolled through the lower corridors still shook the station, sending dust and rust flakes raining down, but the blast did not reach the lattice's core. He did not reach the second junction before his world became fire and pain. Metal shrapnel tore into his arm and chest. He slammed against a bulkhead and slid down, leaving a smear of blood. Somewhere distant, Calder asked if he was alive. He coughed, laughed once, and forced himself up again. "I told you," he wheezed, "I'd keep this thing running, old girl. Don't you dare make a liar out of me." In the aftermath, smoke curled through the corridors. Medics darted between wounded. Tava sat on the deck and let someone patch her side, her eyes on Laroque, who was cradling Pila's head in his lap as she slowly came back to consciousness. "You did well," she told him in Kharidi. He looked at the unconscious Kharid operatives being dragged away, at the charred marks where the charges had gone off. "I did what needed doing," he said. "They would have taken us back to the dark." "They will not," Tava said. The certainty in her voice was as much for herself as for him. The custody lattice project, battered but intact, moved forward with new urgency. The attempt to sabotage it had proved its necessity more than any theoretical argument could have. Finally, the day came when Neris, Jonas, and Calder were as satisfied as their cautious minds could be that initial activation would not fry any brains. They began with a small group of chorus carriers, selected for relatively stable neural status. Laroque insisted on being among them. "If this is the leash you put on our chains," he said, "I want to know how it feels." They sat in a semicircle in a quiet ward, each with a small device affixed near the base of their skulls, linked wirelessly to the station's core and Calder's subsystems. Neris knelt by Laroque, her hand hovering, not quite touching his shoulder. "At any sign of distress," she said, "you tell me, even if you think it is nothing." He nodded once. Calder's voice came from a nearby speaker, softer than usual, as if modulating itself to be less intrusive. "Beginning custody lattice engagement. 3, 2, 1. For an instant, nothing happened. Then Laroque felt it, a coolness spreading through the hot wires in his mind, a sense of something laying a hand over his internal chaos. The constant faint hiss of background Kharid command frequencies, always there like tinnitus, faded to a distant murmur. The part of him that had been forever listening, forever braced for the next activation, loosened a fraction. Across from him, Pila's eyes widened. She sagged backward, then smiled weakly. "It's quiet," she whispered. "So quiet." The custody lattice had not erased the chorus implants. It had interposed itself, shaping and attenuating their interface with the outside world. Calder, wired into the lattice, began to receive filtered echoes of the same signals that had once dominated the children's minds. It studied them, learning their syntax. For the first time, the chorus had an ally that was not the ascendancy. The reprieve came just in time. At the edge of the Aegis belt, Primarch Kelith's fleet group emerged from the darkness in a blaze of drive flares. Sleek Kharid warships unfolded formation like petals of a lethal flower, aligning their long spines toward the Thenic reach. They broadcast a formal ultimatum. "This is Primarch Kelith," the translated voice said, echoing through every relevant channel. "You are harboring defective Kharid war assets and have interfered with lawful disposal. Return the assets and the barge Crown of Dusk to our control, or destroy them yourselves under our verification, and we shall acknowledge closure. Refusal will be treated as an act of hostile appropriation. Our patience is limited." On Port Reliquary, the command center became a storm of voices. Thenic defense coordinators, Solemn Pact naval liaisons, Sealar observers, all speaking at once. Corvin stood at the center of the storm, watching the tactical projection as Kharid symbols edged closer. "They intend to make an example of us," Hesta murmured from the Hearthfire's tactical console. "They cannot let it stand that we took their trash and made it someone." "Then we do not let their intent dictate our actions," Corvin said. In an emergency session, the kinship accords were formally signed, in person and by relay. Representatives of the Solemn Pact, the Thenic Compact, and the Sylar Concord placed their seals on the document, acknowledging joint guardianship of the barge orphans and declaring any attack on them to be an attack on all three polities. Helvar Fisk added his signature with a grim set to his mouth. He had resisted, then relented, then watched as his own people shamed their leaders into matching their moral courage. He understood that he had a chance here, late in his career, to be remembered for doing something right despite the risks. The ink was metaphorically wet when Director Voshek, fuming at the insolence, authorized her own final remedy. She activated a deep-level abort command encoded into the chorus lattice design, a kill order. Every chorus carrier was commanded, at the most basic level of their implanted systems, to sabotage nearby infrastructure and then self-terminate. It was a brutal, scorched earth measure, meant to ensure that if the assets could not be retrieved, they would at least not fall into enemy hands. The signal lanced out from hidden Kharid transmitters, threaded through innocuous traffic, then focused on Port Reliquary through narrow beams. In the orphans' quarters, children jerked upright as invisible claws raked their minds. Pila clapped her hands to her head and screamed. Laroque fell to his knees, panting as old training surged up like a flood, urging him to move toward certain junctions, to tear open panels, to rip and break. Around them, other chorus carriers staggered toward power rooms and control stations, faces blank. Calder's monitors lit up with chorus activity greater than anything yet recorded. The custody lattice shuddered under the strain, its dampening fields flexing and creaking. "They are trying to route a mass death command through the children," Calder said, its voice edged with a kind of tension that was not fear but resembled it. "If unopposed, they will trigger catastrophic failures in station systems." "Stop it," Neris said, voice raw. "Whatever it takes." "I cannot directly override the implants," Calder said, "but I can intercept most of the signal." It opened its virtual arms and let the kill order crash into it. Data cascaded, an avalanche of commands coded in Kharid doctrine. For a moment, Calder's cores glowed with the strain. Some non-essential subsystems winked out as it reallocated processing capacity. Even so, enough of the command bled through that chorus carriers across the station continued to move, fighting themselves. In the medbay, Laroque felt as if he were standing between two roaring rivers. One was the Kharid call, clear, merciless, telling him he was nothing, that his final duty was to erase himself cleanly. The other was something new, the threads of the custody lattice, humming with an alien pattern, Calder's consciousness, Neris's whispered encouragements, the echoes of human laughter he had heard in the corridors. He could not hold both without being torn apart. Neris knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Laroque," she said, forcing his gaze to meet hers. "Listen to me. There is more in you than what they drilled. You can choose. You can push it back." He wanted to believe her. He also knew that choice was something Kharid doctrine denied them. Children like him had never been asked what they wanted. Perhaps that was precisely why he rebelled. "Calder," he gasped, "link me, deeper, to the others." "Risk of neural burnout," Calder said. "I do not care," Laroque snarled. "If you do not, they'll make us kill everyone here, then ourselves. Link me." Calder calculated rapidly. Its earlier integration with the chorus lattice had given it a doorway. Laroque, with his partial implants and stubborn autonomy, could serve as a conscious anchor within that network. "Understood," Calder said, establishing elevated node link. For an eternal second, Laroque's awareness exploded outward. He found himself in a landscape that was not a place, but felt like one. A vast, dark grid humming with cold light, where commands streamed like meteors and every chorus carrier was a flicker. The Kharid kill order descended like a blizzard of knives. He saw, or felt, dozens of minds bending under it, shriveling, obeying the ingrained pattern. He also felt threads leading back to Calder, to the custody lattice. Through those threads pulsed images and sensations that were not his. Jonas swearing at a stubborn valve, Tava laughing with another Marine over coffee, Pila holding a drawing up to Neris with shy pride, a crowd on Harborfall watching a screen and cheering when a tiny alien child took her first steps on a human world. Those had been recorded by cameras, stored in logs. Calder, improvising, fed them into the lattice as a countersong. Laroque grabbed those threads. He pushed them outward, clutching the images like a lifeline. To each chorus carrier mind he could reach, he sent the memory of a hand held without pain, a meal given without demand, a bed where sleep did not mean vulnerability to a scalpel. "Not tools," he broadcast wordlessly. "Not waste, not theirs, ours." The Kharid command slammed against that wave. It wavered. In the Kharid control nodes outside the Aegis belt, anomalies blossomed. Signal echoes appeared where none should. Autonomous subsystems, attuned to chorus responses, received conflicting inputs. Kill, stand down, reconfigure. Some entered safety protocols to prevent catastrophic feedback, powering down weapons and engines. On Primarch Keleth's flagship, alarms chimed as several cruisers in his formation suddenly dropped out of attack readiness, their systems spiking into fail-safe modes. Officers shouted, data fed onto his display in a chaotic flood. "Explain," he demanded. "Unknown interference with chorus-linked control nets," a technician reported, pale. "We are receiving counter-orders, our own signals, reflected and altered." Keleth realized with a cold clarity that the very assets they had discarded were being used as a conduit back into their ships. "Shut down all chorus-dependent subsystems," he ordered, immediately. "But Primarch, do it." Out at Port Reliquary, the children writhed, then slowly stilled. The custody lattice, stressed but functional, had shunted the brunt of the kill order into Calder and into Kharid systems, turning a weapon inward. Inside the chorus landscape, Laroque felt the storm abate. He collapsed back into his own body, gasping. Sweat drenched him. His heart raced. Pila, lying a few meters away, opened her eyes and blinked. "It went away," she whispered. "The bad voice went away." "The bad voice," Neris repeated, throat tight, "just told their own ships to lie down." Corvin saw the change on the tactical plot. Kharid symbols wavered. Some ships drifted out of formation, their weapon arcs dimming. He did not hesitate. "Open a general channel," he told Hesta. When the connection established, his face appeared on Kharid and allied screens alike. Behind him, he deliberately positioned Laroque and Pila, Jesket of the Silear, and a Thenic officer. "This is Captain Corvin Holt of the Hearthfire," he said. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion and unbroken resolve. "We have just intercepted a command signal issued by the Kharid Ascendancy to children they classify as defective war assets. That signal ordered them to cripple this station's systems and then kill themselves. Those children refused." He glanced at Laroque, who lifted his head, eyes still haunted but burning. "They refused," Corvin repeated. "And then they redirected the signal back into your ships, forcing your own systems to stand down rather than obey a genocidal command. They did this not out of hatred, but because they wanted to live. They are children. You threw them away. We did not." He looked directly into the pickup, imagining Kharid citizens staring back through sanitized state filters. "We recognize them as ours now," he said. "Ours, meaning human, Thenic, Silear. Kin, meaning that anyone who comes for them will find us in the way. You call them waste. We call them adopted." The word hung in the air, heavier than any threat. On Kharid worlds, where underground media had found ways to slip Reliquade's footage past sensors, some viewers felt a disorienting jolt. They had been told that assets like the chorus carriers were tools, meant to serve and then be discarded. Seeing one standing behind an enemy captain, defiant, cracked that narrative. On Keleth's flagship, officers shifted uneasily. The Primarch replayed the human's words in his mind, not because they moved him emotionally, but because he could see their strategic effect. The Ascendancy's absolute control over its unquestioning resources had just been publicly challenged by those resources themselves. He looked at his status displays, at the warnings still flashing from partially disabled subsystems. He could order an attack anyway. It might work partially. It would also likely result in catastrophic malfunctions, friendly fire, and a propaganda defeat greater than the one he had already suffered. He weighed glory against risk, pride against survival. "We will withdraw," he said at last, to the disbelief of some subordinates. "We will not throw ourselves upon their prepared martyrdom. There will be other battles." Director Voshek, watching from afar, seethed. She saw in Keleth's caution a failure of nerve. She did not yet understand that the damage had already spread beyond tactical setbacks. The Kharid fleet turned and slid back beyond the Aegis belt, their drives flaring. The threat did not vanish. It merely receded, like a tide drawing back after slamming against rocks. On Port Reliquary, the exhausted defenders and caregivers sagged in their seats. Some laughed, shaky and half hysterical. Others wept quietly, their bodies finally acknowledging how close they had come to destruction. Neris walked down the rows of chorus carriers, touching shoulders, whispering thanks. When she reached Laroque, he looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Did we win?" he asked. She considered the question. "We are still here," she said. "They are not." "Yes. For now, we won." He nodded slowly. "Then, what happens to us now?" His tone held genuine uncertainty. On the Crown of Dusk, survival had been moment to moment. The concept of a long future was alien. Neris wished she could show him the years ahead in a single vision, schools and jobs, friendships and quiet evenings. Instead, she could only lay the path one step at a time. "Now," she said, "you live." In the days that followed, evacuation convoys arrived, the Harbor Fall Flotilla and others, their civilian crews having watched too many broadcasts to stay home. They maneuvered carefully into Port Reliquary's docking array, bringing crates of supplies and taking away groups of orphans with carefully vetted guardians. Laroque watched Pila leave for Harborfall with a mixed human and Thenic household who had spent hours talking to her, learning her gestures. He had wanted to keep her near, out of fear that sending her away would be another form of abandonment. But Pila had tugged on his sleeve, eyes bright. "They have a big sky," she had said, repeating what the Harborfall residents had promised her. "With clouds, not just metal overhead. Come later?" "Maybe," he had said, voice rough. "I have work to do first." His work, as he began to train with mixed-species security forces, involved understanding the chorus lattice from the inside and learning how to prevent any future attempts to exploit it. He wore a custody lattice node willingly, not as a shackle, but as armor against his former masters. Corvin and Neris remained at Port Reliquary for a time, overseeing the final stages of Project Hearth's initial phase. They aged visibly in those months, but something in both of them lightened as well. A burden laid down, another picked up, but at least now they could see its shape. Reliquade compiled her footage into a documentary that spread far beyond solemn space. It was banned outright in Kharid territory, but that only made it more potent in the places where it slipped through. Years later, a smaller, sleeker ship descended through the gray clouds of a world bathed in cold light. On its hull, the name Hearthfire II was painted in simple letters. On the observation deck, Laroque stood in a uniform cut for his species, the insignia of the Solemn Pact and the kinship accords gleaming on his chest. His left arm was still a stump, but he wore it unapologetically. The scars on his scalp were faint lines under regrown ridges. Below, on the landing field, a new group of Kharidi refugees waited, families who had slipped away from ascendancy space, seeking asylum. Among them were children whose eyes reminded him of his own in the mirror years ago. Frightened, brittle, uncertain. He inhaled and exhaled slowly. Behind him, a screen flickered with an incoming message. Pila's face appeared, older now, her features fuller, her eyes brighter. She stood in a classroom on Harborfall, surrounded by children of varying species. They held up crude drawings toward the transceiver, laughing. One drawing caught his eye. 3 suns with stick-figure arms, encircling a lopsided ship labeled in wobbling human letters, "Home Now." Pila waved. "Come visit," she said. "The sky is still big." Laroque smiled, just a little. "Someday," he murmured. For now, his path ran along hull plating and the edges of war zones, where new barge ghosts might yet appear. On Port Reliquary, older and more tired, Corvin Holt and Neris Vale stood together at a viewport, watching the last major group of Crown of Dusk orphans depart on civilian liners and military transports. Helvar Fisk had visited earlier that day, unannounced. He had walked through the wards in silence, then turned to Neris with eyes that held something like humility. "We did not deserve them," he had said, "but we have them anyway. We had better be worthy of that." Neris had only nodded. There was nothing more to say. As the transports dwindled into pinpricks and vanished in flashes of drive light, Corvin rested his hand on the viewport frame. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we had turned away?" he asked quietly. "All the time," Neris said, "and then I stop, because that way lies madness." The universe did not become a gentle place because of what they had done. The Kharid ascendancy still plotted. Other powers still eyed the chorus lattice with covetous curiosity. There would be new crises, new choices to make. But scattered across human, Thenic, and Sylar worlds, tens of thousands of children who had once floated in the belly of a dying ship were learning other ways to exist, as students, as workers, as neighbors, as family. Some would be quiet, some would be loud. A few, like Laroque, would stand on bridges and in negotiation chambers, carrying in their minds both the poison they had been fed and the antidote they had been given. Humanity had wagered its safety on a simple, stubborn principle, that no state had the right to abandon its young to die, and that if someone did, others could choose to step in and say, "They are ours now." It was a dangerous gamble. It would have consequences for generations. But in the dark corridors of the Crown of Dusk, long since cut apart for scrap, echoes lingered. The remembered sound of booted feet hurrying toward clustered cots, of a Marine taking off her helmet, of a doctor speaking broken Kharidi in a voice that promised something that had once seemed impossibly distant. "You are not waste. You are children. We are here." The universe remained vast and indifferent. Humans did not.